Hi, everyone. How are you? Okay. Just to give you a little history, Caseware RCM is a new company, a division in Caseware. And last year I was here representing Simsure. Okay. So a few months back, Caseware acquired Simsure. And this company's focus is largely around continuous auditing and continuous monitoring. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about some of the things that we have seen with customers over the past 5 or so years. And John Verver earlier presented and talked about this maturing cycle. What I'd like to do is to take it a little bit further and talk about some of the customers that have gotten it right, and now they're in another dilemma as to how to take it even further. If you look at the Gartner report that came out, Gartner said that this market is growing by double digits for some of the smaller vendors, aka us, and and overall it looks good. But what Gartner also said is that it's still relatively immature, and so what we'll talk about is who are these guys? These are some of our early customers. When we started with them, they're all energetic, and our biggest challenge was just getting them to switch and started doing something. And that was the toughest part. Once you got it working, the results were very good. They were quite impressed. They were easy to please. So what will happen in those audit departments is that they would now start to get quite a reputation. And eventually, something else happens. The business starts saying, how exactly are you doing this? And then the business also starts saying, how can I do it myself? And that's another challenge in of itself. It sounds like a great opportunity, but it is also a bit of a challenge. But over the years, what we have seen is this. These guys have now somewhat graduated, become a little bit older. Still teenagers in the context of continuous auditing nonetheless, because I don't think that there are any grandfathers here. So we're talking about you're more seasoned and your challenges are now different. How do you sustain the effectiveness of internal controls that you gained before? How do you keep that? How do you make that sustainable? How do you keep the momentum going? There's a big focus on return on investment. How do you value it? Are we really getting value from all this work that we're doing? And another question that nobody likes to pose, but what about manual controls? How important is that? Are we monitoring that? And if we are not, is it a true reflection of what is happening in the organization? Of what is happening in the organization. And then the last one is, okay, so what is my role as audit? What happens to me in the future? And those are some of the things that you're seeing. And so in one instance, you're there, you're internal audit, you're doing a great job, and then suddenly you're not quite sure where you fit in the whole thing as it changes and it transforms into more of something that's very specific for the business. So let's look at what we propose to customers, this is what happens when you move from periodic audits to continuous audit. When you do periodic audits, what you generally see is what we call a yo-yo effect. The busiest time for anyone that's like a chief financial officer or a chief accountant is when the auditors are coming in, right? So everyone gets all busy. Everything is in line. All the controls are now working. The audit gets done. They go off on vacation, they come back, and they start the cycle again. And what happens is that during that time, the level of internal control or the effectiveness of internal control just keeps on taking a nosedive. Of course, until the auditors come in again next year. That's what is happening. So you perceive in an organization that this is where your control effectiveness lies. But in truth, that's not the case. It's averaging somewhere there. And what we say to customers is that by moving to continuous audits, you get a different reality. One where your continuous, your level of internal controls or the control effectiveness improves over time as you lower the cycles that you're looking at controls and how you're monitoring them. And if you do that, then your expectation might be at that level, but in reality, it's something like that. That's what we say to them. Now the challenge is, how do you sustain that? Apart from just monitoring it, how do you sustain it? You will see everyone very excited about your continuous audit and monitoring project in the first year. When you find anomalies and you can report, oh, we're saving $200,000, we're saving $1 million. Okay, what happens after 12 months? You get the areas under control, you're not finding anything. Does it wane a little bit? How do you sustain that? How do you maintain that? What we have found is that you have to make it a part of the business process. So, for example, if we implement continuous monitoring in a utility company, one of the things that we would say is, well, the bills don't go out until that process has been run and everything is okay. Or you'll also say, if you're monitoring payroll, the payroll just can't go off until you get the results of the monitoring for that area. So you start to inject it more deeply in the business process. And when you start doing that, of course, some of the controls now moves away from internal audit and start going to the business process owners. Another thing that we also suggest is that you start looking at how to expand the scope of what you're doing. Just start looking at other areas. Don't just say, oh, well, we put in something for P2P or purchase to pay, and it's working, and that's it. You have to start looking at how you expand and look at other areas to get the results. If you also tie these initiatives to other control initiatives like your COSO or your Sarbanes-Oxley and so on, what you'll find is that you get a much more sustainable framework for compliance. Rather than having a situation where your continuous audit is really being driven by internal audit, and then COSO oftentimes is being driven by management, there's a big disparity between which one is going to take priority. And if you can inject your continuous audit projects within that framework, you'll find that you get much more, you're much more likely to sustain what you're doing. The other thing that we're seeing too is more mature customers are now getting concerned about value. What is the value? How do you determine value? So I'll give you a scenario. If you have a situation where you have a supervisor, a cashier that was acting as a supervisor this week, okay? And everything went well. Or the supervisor is back. So now you have a situation where the cashier had access to do the supervisor functions last week, and this week IT reassigned her permissions, and now she's able to do both cashiering and supervisory work. Of course, all of you here recognizes that that's a potential segregation of duties violation. So what happens is that she starts to go through and start processing transactions, and while she's doing that, she realizes that her transactions that she's putting in for the discounts are also being approved automatically. That didn't happen before. Initially, it was convenient, right? So she went ahead with it. And then after a while, her friend comes in, and her friend says, Alicia, I like the way that you've been promoted in your job. And I think that it's about time that you should be able to give me a discount. You know, not the 2% discount that you normally do, but give me something a little bit more substantial. So Alicia goes ahead and put through, say, 40%. As she's doing that, within a week, the company probably loses, say, $7,300 or something like that. And I'm going to show you how this happens. Let's look at the timeline. On the first day, IT reassigned her the cashier role. So last week, she was a cashier supervisor. This week, she's now a cashier as well. She realizes that she can go ahead and approve her own discounts. At this point, you haven't lost any money, okay? She goes ahead, she put through the normal discounting, which is below 5%. You still haven't lost any money. Then her friend comes in, and that's when she does the 40% discount. You lost $800. Let's say this is a hardware store, right? So it's not a clothing store, it's a hardware store. Then her brother comes in the next day, and she says, well, if I gave my friend 40% discount, you're my brother, I can give you 50% discount. Let's make sure that you invite me over to dinner, okay? So her brother, now cumulatively, you're up to $2,400 already, right? Day 5, of course, the brother returns. It's time to do the bathroom after all. You know, not just the kitchen. Let's do the bathroom as well. This time, she does 70% discount. And she's going to be over for dinner every weekend for another 6 months. If you were doing continuous auditing, what would have happened is that you would have triggered an alert on the first instance of the segregation of duties. That's when the IT persons reassigned her those permissions, okay? Once she starts to abuse it, meaning that she's creating her own discounts and approving it all by herself, then you start to send off alerts for those. You start escalating the exceptions or the alerts if no one is dealing with it, right? So you're going through, you're doing all of that. And this is how continuous auditing would have prevented the company from losing money. Because up to day 3, the company really didn't lose any money. And at that point, you would have had 3 alerts that went off and 2 escalations to someone else. So you brought in 2 persons into the play. That's how it is supposed to work. If at the end of day 5, nobody did anything in this company, well, they deserve to lose the money. The next question is, what is the value? What is the value? Okay, so if you detected it at day 1, did you save the company $7,300?
You'll never know.
Exactly. That's a good answer. And that's why I'm posing some of these things as questions, because there's a lot of debate about this stuff, right? Okay. What happens if the losses were not detected for a year? You still don't know, because there's nothing that says she would have continued with the fraudulent transactions. So should we anticipate any future losses? Should we consider the impact if this went public? How would it damage the company's reputation? Should we consider that? If you detect it on day N, any day, say 60 days down the line, how do we determine value at any point in that line? There are other things that you have to consider. The fact that you can monitor the system and prevent the cashier from perpetrating a fraud, although she has been presented with the opportunity, is that of any value in of itself? So, think about this. Is it more valuable to have a situation where your cashiers know that they are being monitored effectively and therefore are not likely to take chances and remain very good employees? Or do you want to present them with opportunities, and if they have a need, then you get a fraud? What's the value of that, and how do you value that? Another thing that happens in continuous auditing systems, if you're not detecting anything, what is the value? Is there value in you not detecting anything? How do you determine that? And that's what we're seeing where customers are saying, we want to be able to start putting value to that and tracking that. The final thing that I want to talk about is, and I have some approaches here, but I'm just going to raise another point. The last one is, what about manual controls? When we go in to do an implementation and we look at the process, we don't just look at automated controls, you have to look at everything. Because guess what? No matter how great the system is, there are key manual controls that are in the process that if they are not monitored and if they don't work, the effectiveness of internal controls will take a major beating. Are we going to ignore that? Or are we going to say that, well, you need to automate all your controls and not ask me to monitor manual testing? Is that acceptable? Is that acceptable in the context of what we're doing here? For us to say we are only going to be concerned about automated controls. And that's it. That's what customers are also saying. They're saying, how do we deal with that? I have done a risk assessment for my organization. I've paid huge sums of money to do it. The consultants came back and they said, this is what your risks look like. But only a certain percentage of it is automated. And your systems are going to be monitoring automated controls. What about the manual controls? Are you going to ignore that? One of the things that we have seen some customers do is that they have systems in place that helps them in monitoring manual controls. And what we have been doing is looking at what they're doing with those systems and also try to pull data from those systems and feed it back into our control monitoring framework. And by doing that, we get a much better picture, or at least one version of the truth that we're trying to get to. And this is something that you'll see is going to come up more and more as we go down this road of trying to establish and mature the whole business of continuous auditing and monitoring. This is a question that will not go away. It's going to be here. And so what I wanted to do in this presentation is just raise these issues. What we're seeing when you start moving from a customer that is just starting to do continuous auditing to one that is a lot more mature in the process. And they start to come back to you as a vendor and they are saying, how do we do this? Should we be concerned about that? And so in the context of this symposium, which is more of an academic focus, I thought that would be worthwhile raising, and maybe some of the students that are doing their PhDs and so on might want to examine some of that and see how it fits in with the context of what we're doing. Thank you.